You are good to go. Thank you. Good morning. Today is Wednesday, February 22nd, 2023. It's 8:30 a.m. And this is the meeting of Senate Natural Resources and Energy. This morning we're doing some bill introductions, and we're starting with Bill S81, Act relating to establishing the chloride contamination reduction program at the Agency of Natural Resources. So we'll start, as we usually do, with the bill sponsor, hear about motivation for introducing the bill, and then we'll go to Legislative Counsel, Mr. O'Grady, to do a walkthrough of the bill language itself. With that, good morning, Senator McCormick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Dick McCormick, State Senator from Windsor County, a member of this committee, but I'm here now as the chief sponsor of S81. S81 is a bill pertaining to chloride contamination reduction and a chloride contamination reduction program at the Agency of Natural Resources. It's usually referred to as the SALT bill. That has risen ruffled some feathers because people wonder if it's a bill to prohibit salt, and it is not. But it is a bill to begin the process of getting control over sodium chloride. The bill addresses, and that's sodium chloride, as our science teacher will tell you, is commonly known as salt. The bill addresses chloride contamination in Vermont surface and groundwater through reduced, excuse me, my glasses are fogging. Tissues. Well, I can probably do this one better. Thanks. That happened to me at the joint session the other day. Just did it all from memory. The bill addresses chloride contamination in Vermont surface and groundwater through reduced salt application on roads and other impervious surfaces without compromising public safety. Impervious surfaces, of course, are the problem because the water bearing the salt runs off. This will be achieved through extensive monitoring of water salinity levels, tracking the import of salt into the state, establishing a baseline of use. Requirements for salt storage for facilities, in particular, as we get into the details of the bill, that storage be covered by the dates. And development of best management practices for municipal and private salt applicators. Bold picture, and then we'll hand it off to staff. Establishing best management practices for applicators, liability protection for people who purport to whatever regulations develop, storage and disposal, expanded monitoring. Of course, nothing is free, so appropriations. The need for S81. The largest source of chloride is road salt and other de-icing products, but salt solutions are also used on dirt roads in the summer to reduce dust. We've seen that. I've seen that for years, not realized that it's just the same stuff. According to the U.S. Geographical Service survey, the use of road salt, primarily sodium chloride, has tripled nationwide since 1970 to a total of 20 million metric tons. Studies on the levels of chloride in Vermont waters are ongoing, but early results show increases in Lake Champlain and its tributaries. Some of the highest chronic and acute levels are in smaller streams and rivers adjacent to impervious surfaces and municipalities. Lake Champlain, because it's so big, allows for more dilution, so the problems are more severe in the smaller bodies. However, Lake Champlain is not headed in a good direction. Contamination of natural waters is the first place I looked when I was first approached about this bill. But part of the learning experience is that it also overly salty water also damages plumbing. And it damages machinery. The presence of sodium chloride in water above certain levels causes corrosion of drinking water systems, which can result in increased levels of lead, copper, and iron. Researchers have linked the high lead contamination in Flint, Michigan, which you all heard about, drinking water to high chloride levels. There are impacts on aquatic biota, which one would imagine is probably the first thing one would think of. So we have freshwater biota here. So, and there are, as I just said, impacts on biota. So I will hand it off to legislative council to look at the details. I would hope that the committee will look favorably on this. It's no small problem. And again, we are not looking to ban salt. I think that comments in the hall about, people's lives. The whole idea is to study it so that we can figure out how to put less salt into the environment without endangering people. I don't like to drive on slippery roads anymore either.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, are there comments or questions?
Everybody.
Thank you, Chairman Bray. Thank you, Senator McCormick, for bringing this bill up. It's a topic that I think we've both heard from constituents on. I'm wondering if you could comment about what the bill would look at in relation to brine, which is a different type of salt application, and also some of the alternatives to salt. I know that our agency of transportation has looked at a few different combinations, including like the brown, almost like a sludge-like material that seemed great in theory as a replacement, but we've heard feedback on. So I'm wondering if you've thought about the alternatives and what those would
Well,
be.
my understanding as a layperson, because I'm not doing the study.
Yeah.
I'm trying to have it
Okay.
get started. I'm doing the politics.
Okay.
But my understanding is that the problem with the brine is that it doesn't break away.
Mm.
It stays. And that can be a problem. But that's off the top of my head. I will say though, since Senator, since you mentioned transportation, I'm sure I'm not the only person who has been aware that when people are selling used cars, the fact that a car has previously driven in the south as opposed to the northeast is a selling point for the car, because salt wrecks our cars and it shortens their lives. I had a car that everything was fine except the underside was all rotted and it was all road salt.
I know that when I'm at the garage, I've been told many times that the driver's side is more wear and tear than the passenger side, because they tend to salt the middle of the boat. So brakes and undercarriage parts on that side get more chewed up.
Well, yeah, I mean, our highway salt really created a whole industry for Bondo. Not everyone knows what Bondo is. The senator from Windsor often comments that she did not grow up wealthy, so she knows what Bondo is. Those are kind of modeling clay that they use on cars to cover.
Might have some chemicals in it too.
Yeah, to cover the spot, to cover the rust.
You can fix a rotten windowsill with it too, it turns out. Who knew? Sir?
The chairs at the end of the hallways, this end was replaced last summer. It was granite, and the granite was dissolving and flaking off because of the salt we use here in State House. And granite's a little tougher than automobiles siding.
Now those steps and the walkway are heated, so they won't salt. Don't need.
What's
Yeah.
And if the committee is done with my testimony, I will relinquish the role of the requester of things and resume my powerful position as.
This is our chance to ask
Or
any
it's-
questions.
oh,
Senator White.
Okay, well, I so rarely have the opportunity to interrogate you because we agree on so much.
You didn't say it was gonna be a test.
I did. So in your bill, and I apologize, I did not read it before you presented it to us. It requires the Agency of Transportation to do the study?
Yes, oh,
So
yeah, yes.
versus, so I'm wondering, it's in our committee.
Yeah.
Have you spoken to anyone at the Agency?
I
of
have
Transportation?
spoken with the chair of the Senate Transportation Committee. Prior to that.
Okay.
I think I'm softening him up.
Okay. You're melting the ice, as it were?
Well, no, but I think he, as chair, I can't speak for someone else, but what he had said to me was that he was worried about safety.
Yep.
That it's not as though people are applying salt to our roads maliciously. It has a good purpose. And the bill directs the Agency of Transportation to work with natural resources.
This is my unscientific impression that we're counting on roads to be clearer now, immediately after a storm or during a storm. And we used to expect 10 years and 20 and 30 years ago. People don't want to be held up.
And even there's, from my understanding, this is my nerd topic for transportation, which is, I believe New Hampshire and Vermont, we actually have different standards for what the level of, it's like the blacktop, like what you can see post plowing. So our standards, from my understanding, are stricter than New Hampshire standards. And that can lead to different uses of salt or brine or what have you.
New Hampshire does have a desalinization.
Okay, if there are no further questions, thank you, Senator McCormick. I'm sure that this quiet little topic will gain some interest around the world.
I expect to get emails that we're trying to kill everybody. We're already trying to bankrupt them according to some email.
Have to worry about that.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. O'Grady, could you give us a tour of the bill, please?
Do you want it up on the screen or not?
We all have copies, so
This is Michael Grady with the State Council.
let me ask a quick question. For people, when people are viewing the video, they can see the screen, right? Correct?
They can see what.
Yeah. So if we, can you put it up or does team need to put it up?
I just need to have a Zoom link and sharing in order to put it up myself.
On there right now.
Okay.
Thank you. But, so we'll be sharing that on the screen in a moment, and for people who are looking at this later, you can go to our committee website and pull up a copy of the bill. It's S81 as introduced.
So,
Did you get it?
not yet.
You have Zoom open?
I do have Zoom open, but I'm looking for an email.
Okay.
One of the causes for loose speed on highways, springs, they go down and collect the salt off the blacktop.
It's just heartbreaking.
Yeah. It's a public service.
Porcupines go to the lean-tos on the hiking trails.
Do what?
Porcupines like to go to the lean-tos on the hiking trails to chew the wood because it's got perspiration in it. So,
Not sure what they're getting out of wood. Something.
And kids should be elite campers.
Having a no food.
Well, they do like boots.
It sounds like this is a story I'll hear later.
Sometimes you come to a lean-to on the lawn trail, and there'll be a pile of rocks. Throw it. And you're supposed to replenish the pile.
All right, great. Thank you. Hey, thank you, Mr. Green.
So this is Mike O'Grady with the Office of Legislative Counsel. I'm going to walk through S81 and an act relating to establishing the chloride contamination reduction program at the Agency of Natural Resources. Before I get into the text, I'm going to give a general overview. The bill would require A&R consultation with the Secretary of Transportation to set up a program at the Agency of Natural Resources to train commercial salt applicators and municipal salt applicators in best management practices for the application of both salt and salt alternatives. It also provides those that are certified after they complete that training with the liability protection. So if someone gets hurt because of the reduced salt or salt alternative application, and that person was following the BMPs that were established by A&R under this bill, that person is not going to be subject to liability because they were following the BMPs established by A&R.
What's the current status? Let's say,
It's basically negligence. You would look and see if they were applying according to the duty of care. This bill allows the person to say that they were negligent, but they would probably have to show that they were not following the BMPs. In addition, the bill establishes some requirements for storage. First, it will require all salt storage to be mapped so that it is known where they are, and then it would require salt storage to be covered. The covered is a interesting aspect because US EPA tried to do that a few years ago and met a lot of resistance from municipalities in coverage because it costs to cover. So that's something that you may likely hear from municipalities about. In addition, it establishes some clarification, I would say, for water monitoring, as when there's identification of a pollutant entering the water of the state or a wetland of the state, that the first monitoring should be done where that pollutant enters. That's not always done today. Sometimes it's done downstream or outside of the mixing zone. And what this bill would require is that the monitoring would be conducted where the pollutant has been identified as entering the water. And that actually has implications for salt sheds because they do run off.
okay, that's all right.
And then there is a appropriation in the bill for 2 FTEs at A&R, 1 FTE at the Agency of Transportation, and then an appropriation for monitoring, use monitoring under the La Rosa program.
The positions, are they, in our, in the bill, for instance, and say, with this, we're to move forward, we think we would need 2 staff, or how do we end up with the staffing requirements?
I am unaware of A&R opining on the positions, but for this, if the new program requires GMPs, requires constant training, you're going to need FTEs.
Is Commissioner Beeling the right person to connect with on this?
Or people from, because it's going to wind up in the Water Resources Division.
Thank you.
So moving on, section 1, it establishes a new subchapter in the water pollution control chapter of Title 10. There are definitions. Apply salt, it's the application of salt or a salt alternative to roadways, parking lots, or sidewalks. Commercial salt applicator is a person who's applying salt or salt alternatives for compensation or supervises others who do. Municipal salt applicator is a person who works for a municipality and applies solar salt alternatives for that municipality. It does not include state employees. The program doesn't apply to state employees. Salt is a sodium chloride or any of the other chloride alternatives. A salt alternative is any substance not containing chloride used for the purpose of de-icing or anti-icing. Then you get to the establishment of the program.
Quick question, does not include state employees or municipal employees. So that's just a policy choice made by the bill sponsor.
It's multiple reasons. First, the agency operates under the TS4, the transportation stormwater program, and the TS4 program has some management provisions in it for salt and salt alternatives. In addition, with regard to the liability, there's already liability protection for state employees working within the scope of their employment. It's the Tort Protection Act. The state can only be sued for a limited amount of damages, and that's only because the state allows it because of state sovereign immunity. And so they already have practices, they already have liability protection. The coverage program, the coverage of the salt shed would apply to them, but most of the state salt storage facilities are covered. And are moving towards full coverage for all of them. So this is really about municipal and commercial.
But we also exclude municipal. It says, but does not include municipal or state employees. So
That there's a municipal salt applicator,
Yeah.
and a commercial salt applicator doesn't include a municipal salt applicator. And a municipal salt applicator doesn't include the state salt applicator.
that's catching up.
Should I move on? The program is established in 1352, Secretary of Natural Resources, so it is cited at A&R, but they consult with AOT, Secretary of Transportation, for education, training, and certification of commercial and municipal salt applicators. Program includes best management practices for application of salt and salt alternatives. And the best management practices shall establish application measures or techniques to increase efficiency. Establish standards for when and how salt and salt alternatives are applied in order to prevent them from entering waters of the state. Recommend salt or salt alternatives that are less harmful to water quality while maintaining safe conditions. Establish record-keeping requirements, including records describing the type and rate of applications, the date of use, and weather conditions requiring use. Establish requirements for application for certification under the subchapter, including frequency of training, manner of training, and application requirements. And then establish other requirements deemed necessary. So a commercial salt applicator, municipal salt applicator may apply annually to A&R to be certified as a state certified salt applicator. And then a business that employs multiple commercial salt applicators, the employer or one of the designated employees may apply to be a master commercial salt applicator, and that they shall ensure that all employees are then trained to comply with the BMPs. Moving on page 4, line 7, A&R in consultation with transportation determines the amount of salt annually imported into the state, determines the average amount of road salt applied from 2010 through 2020, including the summer applications that Senator McCormick referenced. They shall develop a publicly accessible record-keeping database system for road salt purchases and applications. They shall develop salt reduction targets to guide AOT and A&R in measuring reducing chloride levels in surface water and groundwater. That's one thing I want to note. The salt just doesn't affect surface water, it affects groundwater, it affects soil. Over application of salt can affect agricultural uses of neighboring soils. So it is not just surface water.
Certainly.
Thank you, Chair Bright. Does the language in here allow for looking at invasive species? I've heard through the grapevine that knotweed can actually be exacerbated with use of some of the salt because it will kill off some of the, yeah, I'm wondering if this language allows for that kind of research.
It's not in here specifically, but if you're going to be looking at BMPs and application and the negative effects of it, yes, because knotweed apparently can grow in saltier soils than other.
Which is just so disappointing.
Especially if you've never tried to get it out. Should I move on?
Yes, please.
Then you get to 1353, which is the solid application limited liability, as I noted earlier. If the applicator is certified or the owner of the application business is certified and trains their employees, they basically will not be liable for damages arising from hazards on real property owned by others when the hazards are caused solely by snow or ice, and any failure or delay in removing or mitigating the hazards is the result of the applicator implementing the best management practices established by the agency. This is very similar to New Hampshire program, very similar to New Hampshire limited liability afforded to their salt applicators. Page 6, line 1 through 5, that's the master applicator and the liability protection for them. Can they revoke a certification or violation of the requirements of the subchapter in order to receive the liability protection? So page 6, line 14. They have to keep a written record of their use of salt or salt alternatives and their maintenance practices, including the rate of application, the dates of treatment, and weather conditions for each event requiring de-icing. Then on page 7, line 1, you come to 1354, the storage requirements. A&R and consultation with AOT shall require all private, public, state, municipal salt storage facilities to be mapped on the A&R Resources Atlas, and the type of material stored practices shall be reported to A&R. They shall establish best management practices and an education program for salt storage facilities. And then they shall require that all salt and sand storage facilities be undercover by 2030, including facilities eligible for AOT Municipal Assistance Program grant funding. And that's in a transportation bill as part of their transportation bill funding. So all facilities covered by 2030, that's the one that I think that you might want to talk to the league about.
Who owns those facilities?
Any salt and sand storage facility in the state. So it could be privately owned, municipally owned, or state. But as I referenced earlier, the state facilities are largely covered.
Sure.
Yeah, Senator Tom.
I said you would note that in the hamlet of Ely, north of Thetford, across the border into the town of Fairleigh. Just south of that border, the railroad built and installed a salt dumping facility where road salt would be brought in by rail and dumped for use on it. And it contaminated the wells of several of the houses of Dead End Road going into Thetford. And some of those homes have subsequently had new water supplies drilled on their behalf. The meetings to discuss this event, the railroad claimed that it preempted state law, and apparently railroads have the authority to preempt all sort of state laws. But in this particular case, it was, they were violating a law having to do with the protection of natural resources. That was not necessarily, it was a different sort of preemption that the railroads didn't enjoy. And the homeowners were able to be made whole, but it's it's nasty stuff because the people, when you dump it, it doesn't all go in the hopper where you dump it. It spreads out and gets washed around wet rainwater and stuff like that.
So
Subjects of lawsuits.
it has been subject to lawsuits in Vermont. Vermont is one of the states where this issue has been vetted. Some railroads, as I think most of you know, have a very extensive preemption clause underneath the Federal Transportation Act, the Railroad Transportation Act. But there is a provision in it that says that states and municipalities can regulate for, and I'm going to paraphrase, basically the public health and safety. Where those lines are can often be gray. And there has been litigation in the state, most recently, Shelburne. Yeah. The similar railroad salt shed and what A&R could require and what they could not require. They could require some stormwater management, stormwater permitting, but they could not basically prohibit the use of the facility. I think that's something to talk to A&R about whether or not the coverage at a railroad salt facility is going to be preempted, or whether or not it's going to be to fit within the exemption to the railroad. I can talk to Anthea, our transportation attorney. She's actually pretty familiar with the Shelburne case, but it's an issue. The railroads will come in and tell you that they're preempted from everything. But
Yeah, that's
they're
what
not.
it's a quality. You have to have a genetic test to be a lawyer for the railroad that includes a built-in ability to say that statement 24 hours a day without
I would love that.
sleep or not, or under interrogation.
Like, no, you're all preempted. Should I move on?
Yes, please.
Section 2 relates to monitoring of a pollutant when it enters a surface water. You can see on page 8. There's a bunch of updating of the references to the Federal Clean Water Act from last 4 through 18. Really just technical. The substantive changes on page 8, line 19. So the state has to assess compliance of all of its waters with the Vermont water quality standards, and it's basically done on a 3-year schedule required under the Federal Clean Water Act. And monitoring is required in order to do that. So what this language says is when monitoring, according to the 303D list, which is the requirement to monitor every 3 years, and when a discharge is occurring, the Secretary shall monitor the compliance for the pollutant is first discharged to the water or where runoff first enters a water or wetland of the state. That doesn't always occur now, and therefore it can lead to varying results because the concentration of the pollutant may be greater where it first enters the water rather than where monitoring may occur where dilution has occurred already. So that's really what they're looking, the advocates are looking for, is to try to find where the pollutant first enters the water at its greatest concentration.
So that, in contrast, other pollutants entering public waters, it might be being monitored downstream, and when they see a pollutant, they have no obligation to go back upstream and find out its source.
Well, it really depends on how the pollutants enter. If it's a point source, it has to be permitted, and the dilution and the use of the mixing zone might already be authorized. So the fact that it's entering the water and it's found downstream, that's probably permitted under its point source permit. Its non-point is really where you're looking, where this is probably going to be the most relevant. Where non-point, just that stormwater runoff is entering the water, trying to identify where that pollutant is first entering at its greatest concentration is probably going to be the most relevant for non-point. And then, yes, I think if you found that pollutant downstream and you couldn't identify a permitted point source, I think you could look upstream to find where that pollutant first enters at greatest concentration.
And could that be as diffuse as a half-mile stretch of road where it comes alongside a river?
You know, when you look at the 303D list, it is not just the entire river or the entire lake. It is segmented, and the segments are, you know, I really honestly don't know how they determine the segments, because it's usually due to landmarks like upstream, quarter-mile from the bridge that crosses at the boundary of the town of Orange, something like that. So I don't know if the segmentation is really about science, is more about geography and geomorphology.
But so the unique or whatever, the notable thing here is that there's now an obligation to go to look for that where the pollutant is first discharged.
Right, and that's what they do when they do 303D. If they go and do monitoring and they're like, well, this water's impaired, it's aquatic biota or not at the adequate level, or its aesthetics are bad, or it's not suitable for swimming, they'll look to see why, and they'll look to identify the source of that. And the 303D list does include the impairment, the cause of the impairment.
Is the 303D list only a list of impaired waters, or if they're assessing all waters and then you only make it onto that list if there's an impairment found?
They assess all waters and you make it onto the 303D if you are impaired. And then there are other lists. You might not be on the 303D. You might be on one of the other 303 lists. You may still be impaired, but you may have a TMDL. So 303D doesn't have a TMDL, but some of the other 303 lists. There's a great resource that the agency maintains with all the varying 303 lists and some of the other lists, like stressed waters or waters subject to aquatic invasives. It's a really great resource. It's got everything there together on one landing site. And it has a lot of basic plans there as well. So I can provide that to the committee if you would like.
Okay, thank you very much. But yeah, let's go on. Thank you.
Okay. Moving on from there, you get to page 9, line 3, section 3. There is the requirement that A&R in consultation with transportation adopt best managed practices by procedure or by rulemaking. So rulemaking has to follow the full APA process. Take up to 8 months, sometimes a little bit longer. That's the pesticide rule did. Procedure doesn't require that same process. Procedure at A&R still requires a public notice process, but it doesn't require that full-scale APA process. So this bill gives the A&R a little bit of flexibility in how they're going to issue these PMDs.
This notice also apply that there's comment, and also apply that they have an obligation to respond in writing to comments.
Procedure doesn't require that, and the A&R process for issuing a procedure is not as vigorous as under an APA rulemaking. But it provides more flexibility, which is why procedure is often granted. And then as part of the executive branch fee report, there is ever one again. The governor shall recommend a fee for certification of commercial applicators. Should I move on?
Yes, please.
Page 9, line 15, section 4. The agency Agency of Natural Resources shall provide more expansive and consistent testing of surface waters for chloride levels than is established currently in their field manual for monitoring. Any expanded testing may include testing by the watershed groups and conservation districts that do it under the La Rosa program. The La Rosa program is basically a volunteer program that agency runs. And really anybody can be a part of it. You get trained and you get equipment. You go out and do monitoring on a schedule that ANR establishes. It's pretty successful. A lot of people like to do it. You can see that there's some appropriations later on in the bill for it. So page 10, line 1. When initial testing identifies a state water or water segment contaminated by chloride levels that exceed the acute standards established by EPA, ANR shall begin regular monitoring of the chloride levels in the water and investigate potential acute and diffuse contamination sources. So right, your question from earlier is specifically addressed. And then if the source that is causing chloride contamination that exceeds the EPA chronic or acute standards found, ANR shall require monitoring of physical discharge point to the water and the hydrological connection to the water of the state.
The question I have is, since we're, I understand we're a delegated authority, a delegated EPA authority, right? So we have to have an equal to or better than standard. How is it that we don't? Sounds like when I read this, it seems to imply that we don't monitor for fluoride and then meet the EPA requirements with the chronic and or acute standards established. Is that true or?
So the state does monitor for chloride and but at a standard that could be improved. The state is delegated for NIPT's permitting, which is a fairly limited delegation. And then the other requirements are just general application requirements for all states. The 303D list, the establishment of water quality standards, the requirement to develop the TMDL for water is impaired. Those are all unrelated to delegation. Those are all general application requirements in Water Act.
I guess so. I'll back up and try to question it a different way to see how it sounds like we would have to manage to a higher level.
So I think that that's what this language is looking for, is to start monitoring for more frequently at a standard that's currently higher. Now, ANRs can come in and say they basically do most of this, and that they'll probably be okay with those standards.
Yeah.
But this is just specifically putting in a statute.
And I would have thought we would have had to already have managed those standards. I guess that's the piece I'm missing.
Generally, yes, we do. It's just that the advocates think that the state can do more.
Spell it out explicitly.
Then you get to the discharge, page 10, line 11, the appropriations. So there's first $300,000 for La Rosa on line 10, page 10, line 15. And then page 10, line 17, $260,000 for 2 full-time employees. That might actually be a little low, but that's kind of in the ballpark for an FTE right now. I thought they were currently costing out at 150 per, but this bill has them costing out at 130 per. And then page 11, line 1, that's an FTE at the Agency of Transportation to do assistant chloride monitoring and surface waters and implementation of the chloride contamination reduction program. And then page 11, line 7 through 9, you can't bind future general assemblies, especially with their appropriations. And So 7 through 9 is really an intent statement that the appropriations for those FTEs and for La Rosa shall be made annually for the identified purpose.
Which was for future legislatures.
And then the entire act takes effect on passage.
And the figures that are in here, you know, who came up with these estimates that.
The numbers?
Yeah,
Well, that's basically for the FTEs, they do cost out between 130 and 150. So that's normal range.
Yeah.
And then for the La Rosa, I think that number came from the advocates.
any more questions for Mr. O'Grady? Thank you. So we are gonna go on center lines. Thank you for coming back. Your timing is auspicious. I don't know if you want, so let's go on to S82, an act related to the development of a committee to study the impact of PFAS and leachate from landfills in the state. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good to see you in here again this year.
Good to be here. So thank you. For the record, Senator Jenny Lyons. And I have introduced S82, which is, it's a small step in the direction of looking at the introduction of PFOAs into landfills, and then a measurement of perhaps a way of putting a working group in place to understand how to remove those chemicals before they actually get into the landfill. And then also looking at how to perhaps remove PFOAs from any leachate. And then also looking at compostable materials and whether or not PFOAs exist or not. And so the generation of the impetus for doing this really was, as you all know, we've been very interested in PFOAs and there's been a lot of controversy around landfills, around compost and others. I also understand that the DEC is working with one of our largest waste facility folks to have a pilot program to look at the removal of PFOAs from waste before it goes into landfill. And my thinking in putting this bill in was to have a role in understanding about the work that is going on, to get a report back, and perhaps to expand the work that the group is doing now. So it's a small step, but I think it's an important one, and it may lead to further research going forward. I do know that the reason that as you look at the working group, you'll see that I've specifically identified Casella because that's the waste facility company, or the waste company that is working with on the pilot program. And they do have I think they're testing out a unique system for removal of PFOAs prior to entry into the landfill. So that's happening. Sometimes these things happen without any authorization, and that's okay. There's no problem with that. But something as significant as this, I think, important for the legislature to wrap its arms around a little bit and to understand the outcomes. So that's what the bill is. You can go through it and see what all is there. The working group would meet for up to 10 times. It's your decision what might be necessary to talk with folks who might be involved. And then it ends next year. I don't know what the date is. And the group just disappears after they complete their work on February 1st, 2024. So we get a report back about any pilot program that went on and the other information that's asked for. That's it.
Any committee questions for Senator Lyon? Senator Watts?
Thank you. Being from Montpelier, having just come from being mayor there, happen to know that Montpelier is looking into I guess I would call it a gasification plant in conjunction with their wastewater recovery, their water treatment, wastewater treatment plant, and has some potential for breaking down PFOAs in that process, though, as I understand it, there's still stuff to be learned there in the effect of of gasification on PFAS and PFOAs. So I'm somewhat aware of Casella's program being upstream, so to speak, from the wastewater treatment plant Montpelier. But this is a separate potential application.
So put them together.
Yeah, well, I guess that's really where my question was going. Sorry, I'm
Why
having like
not?
a hard time
Why
this
not
morning.
put them together?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, there may be a benefit to doing that.
Yeah.
Yes.
So looking at not just Casella, so I guess I want to just put that out there. Are
That's
you-
your decision.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
you know, you.
If we want to expand it, that's okay.
It's just an introduction,
Yeah.
an introduction to an idea
Yeah.
that you in this committee, you have, fix it,
Okay,
improve it.
cool,
Yeah. Great.
great,
Well,
thank you.
the more we can eliminate these chemicals, the better off we are. And our committee will probably be taking up the cosmetics and our personal products and toxins next week. When we get back, we'll be working on that.
Yeah, we've had sort of the cat in the hat comes back kind of a problem
Yes,
with PFAS where it keeps moving around.
doesn't it?
And but once it's introduced, it's a problem.
Yes, exactly. So this, the wastewater is critically important because all of the personal hair products that we'll be talking about dump into the sewer, and there they are, right? And so if you have a way of eliminating, so much the better, but it doesn't mean we should be putting them there in the first place.
Is Montpelier still accepting leachate from the landfill?
They are, but we anticipate, I should say they, are anticipating that may no longer continue, depending on how speedy their remediation plans are. So they did not want to be sort of stuck continuing to take it, but they also wanted to stay at the table to make sure that Casella's plans were moving forward.
There's been discussion about should they pre-treat that leachate before it leaves the landfill? Should it be treated at the landfill? Should it be treated at the wastewater treatment facility? Does it get permitted? How does that plan get built in?
Well, and it's in, I think, every wastewater treatment plant that was tested for PFAS had some level. Anyway, we can
Sure.
talk more about that.
I'm the transportation salt person.
Yeah. Thank you.
Are we good?
Yeah, so thank you very much for coming in. I think there's an event coming up at 9:30 that you might want to be in your committee for.
I think I'm gonna be going back to my committee now.
Okay.
And thanks for at least looking at this, appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for,
Take care.
it's been laying dormant briefly, but we know the issue's there for sure.
Okay,
Thanks.
see you
everyone.
later.
Really likely to be loud.
Is this event likely to be allowed? I think so. What I'm referring to. Date is there's gonna be a drill this morning, and I think it's scheduled for 9:30. So, I just wanted to go over some
How
shop.
meaningful are those drills when we're forewarned that they're gonna, then we're practicing for will presumably happen as a surprise.
Speaking as a teacher, sorry,
Yeah, practice.
practice.
For road salt.
So Mr. Grady, if you could join us at the table again and walk us through 82.
Sure.
Please.
Chair, would you mind if I bring up Ashley Angel? She's the law clerk for Tucker Anderson and I. She worked on.
Please, yeah,
Yeah.
drop another chair right at the table. I was gonna ask you to. Oh, so I'm glad that you're jumping in.
So just a couple of things on PFAS before I jump into the bill. US EPA has a roadmap that they are implementing to address PFAS in the various programs that they have under water supply, hazardous materials, and in TSCA, the Toxic Substance Control Act. They're moving a little bit slower than I think some people would like, but they are making some substantive progress. In addition, years ago, this committee specifically enacted a PFAS bill that does require ANR to establish drinking water standards, which they've already done, and a water quality standard, which is yet to be done. One of the things that ANR is working on right now is a multi-state / regional effort to try to reduce PFAS in products and reduce the source. Because as you've all, I think, just recognized, it is in every wastewater treatment plant. It's also in drinking water supplies, groundwater supplies. And it is in all the trash that's taken, wherever it may be taken, most likely the landfill in Coventry. My understanding that the leachate from the landfill is not going to Montclair anymore, and is not going to Newport anymore. It's being trucked to Plattsburgh.
I've heard that, which is good news, bad news. Like, it may be good for the Winooski River and Lake Champlain, but not so great for someone else who's getting it here to come from.
So this is timely, and ANR has been working on it, and I think that they'd be a great resource to talk to about what, for example, whether or not gasification should be part of it, or alternative treatment besides pre-treatment, something along those lines.
I don't know if you remember, I didn't ask you to prep on that part, but do you happen to recall, I think as part of permitting the landfill, there were conditions built in that included coming up with a treatment plan for leachate. Are you sort of up to?
They did a pilot program on it and to determine whether or not pre-treatment was feasible. And they wanted to implement pre-treatment. And they were in the permitting process. The last time I talked to the agency about it,
Is that in a sense longer?
Yeah, I think we're gonna get our little loudspeaker here will tell us.
I'm gonna take this off.
Uh,
I'm gonna take this off.